Hi, everybody. Let's get started. Hope you had a nice cup of coffee in Danish and a good break. So I want to introduce now our wonderful moderator. Benedict Carey is an award-winning science reporter who's been at the New York Times since 2004 and is one of the most emailed reporters in the paper. He graduated from University of Colorado with a BA in math. Who would have thunk? And from Northwestern Colorado and from Northwestern University with a master's in journalism. And he's written about health and science for over 25 years. He specializes in psych and behavior topics and has written 3 books, 2 science mysteries for young adults, and a nonfiction book about learning science. He lives in New York City. Ben has been a friend of the Saks Institute for a long time. He's come to other programs of ours and has participated. And he's also written a series of articles about consumers. So he wrote, for instance, about Karis Myrick, who's here with us today from SAMHSA, and he wrote a short piece about me. He wrote a piece about Marshall Linehan, the psychologist who developed DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, Joe Holt, a consumer and pastoral counselor. People say that people coming to see mental health disorders as brain disorders doesn't much reduce stigma, but putting a human face on does. So I think of Ben as my comrade in our fight against stigma. Ben Carey.
Yeah, thanks so much, Elyn. It's nice to be a comrade. I have been at other events, the Saks Institute. It's hard to say no to Elyn Saks, it comes down to. She sort of represents the soul of hope for good things to happen, good reforms in mental health care, I think, in many ways. Okay, we've got some people to hear from. I'm eager to hear from them. This is a newish topic for me, supported decision making. It's one of those great Saks topics in that it is all about these subtle interactions between people, which turn out to be often much more important than the big controversies, you know, about medication and about policy that you read about so much more often. It's about trust and relationships, you know, between doctors and people who get their services, between family members and so on. So supported decision making is one of those things. It's right there, dead center in mental health and good mental health. We're going to hear from all of these people you see here. We've already heard from Jonathan Martinis. It's a great talk. Elyn spoke a little bit. They need no introduction. I am going to introduce the first 2, the Kings, who've come here from Washington, D.C. That's Ryan King there and his mom, Susie King. Ryan King, Mr. King's 34, native of Washington, D.C., who has some disabilities, has lived his life to the fullest by always trying and not giving up. He'll tell you about that. Always seeking ways to enhance his life by being involved in advocacy organizations, making decisions on his own or with assistance from his family. Ryan's has worked for Safeway for 16 years as a courtesy clerk. He enjoys music, traveling, going to movies and concerts, and it turns out attending wrestling events. So maybe he'll elaborate on that as well. Ryan's mother is Susie King, seated next to him. We'll hear from her too. They're a team today. She's been retired for about 7 years, and since the birth of Ryan has become an advocate for people with disabilities. Over the years, she's worked for various groups on the boards of DC Developmental Disabilities Council, DC Parents and Friends of Children with Special Needs, the Inclusion Research Institute, and she is now currently the president of Lifeline Partnership. I'm sure she'll tell us a bit about that. Susie enjoys reading, traveling, helping the elderly, and collecting antiques and art. I'm very curious to hear a little bit about their lives and about Mr. King's life, and so I'll turn it over to the 2 of them.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm going to start by giving you a background of our history and how we ended up with Jonathan Martinis in supportive decision-making in our lives. In the beginning, with every pregnancy, you hope for a healthy baby. In my 6th month, I had toxemia, which is a poisoning of the blood system that causes retention of fluid and hypertension. This is the second time for me. Ryan has an older sister, and also I had toxemia in the 6th month. And as Ryan was born, he was a premature baby at 26 weeks of gestation. As a result of the early birth, he had bleeding in the brain on the right side that affected his left side. He had weak stomach muscles. He had ruptured small intestines. He had lungs collapsing, which led to respiratory issues. And he was 42 days under oxygen, which has damaged his eyes. And there is no cure for the damage that's been done. Ryan now has vision above the eye and basically has some problems with the lower part of his eye, his vision. All of these things led to his disabilities. He has developmental delays, cerebral palsy, visual spatial deficits, and he has sickle cell anemia on top of all of that. What are some of the earlier barriers that we encountered? First, you deal with the guilt as a parent with a child with disabilities. Did I do the right thing during the pregnancy? What happened? How could I have gotten toxemia for the second time after 6 years and being very careful with this pregnancy? So many questions, but with very little answers. Time has to move on because now we are faced with a child that has a special need. We started by educating ourselves and finding out about the sickle cell disease. Fortunate in Washington, D.C., Howard University has a sickle cell research center. They also had a parent support group in which we joined. We are now amongst people who are suffering and going through what we are going through as well. We're not alone, we've discovered. We have relied on the support of many family members, friends, and neighbors who have come to stay with us when all the hospitalizations that Ryan has had. In the beginning, Ryan was hospitalized every month, 3 weeks at home and 1 week in the hospital with the crisis that leads to pneumonia. We have now discovered that not only do we not know about sickle cell, and through our hospital visits, we have doctors that don't know about sickle cell. So we are educating them as we are going through these crises. At birth, we get a neurologist, and he gives us his diagnosis. He tells us he's a cute baby, but his head's not growing. What does that mean? Does that mean that his skull's not growing, or does that mean his brain is not growing? We go to the pediatrician, and we ask for a new neurologist. We need someone that can give us some hope. We must always be aware of finding doctors, again, that has some knowledge of sickle cell, and our pediatrician is as well. Always, if she's not there, she makes sure she's a reference to another person that can assist us. In Ryan's early childhood, finding the right caretaker when I returned to work was quite a challenge. Finding the right educational program once his surgery to repair the intestines was completed. There was a program that's now no longer in existence at the Hospital for Sick Children. It was called the Enrichment Program. It was a preschool program. He entered that program at 18 months, and he stayed until he was 5. It was a very supportive program with staff that were in tune to his needs, had close contact with the family, and weekly updates on his development. We thought that we had found a gem. During his school days, once he exited that program, he entered the DC public school system. And we were told once we went through the IEP program, the individual educational program, that he would have to be put on a waiting list because there were so many children that needed physical therapy services. Not only did Ryan need physical therapy, he needed speech, he needed occupational, and because of the vision deficit, he needed what was called perceptual therapy, which was very rare back then, but there was one teacher that actually did that. Because we were told that he would have to be put on a waiting list, and because our motto at our home is, a person who says I'll try has a chance to succeed, but a person who says I can't is already a failure, we knew that we had to take some action. We got a lawyer, we requested a hearing, and as a result of our hearing, we won, and we were told that DC Public Schools had to provide the service, and it was done through a private therapist, which was a very rewarding experience. The services lasted for 3 years with that therapist until the school system would no longer make payments or made late payments to the provider. She discontinued the service for all the DCPS students that she was serving because she said, I cannot afford to pay my staff now. They're not paying me timely or they're not paying me at all. These services also included for him sensory integration therapy and drama therapy. As Ryan moved to the next phase of his life, which is the middle school, we were then confronted by the principal of the special ed school to say, let's do inclusion. Being protective parents, my husband and I said, we don't know about that. We're just not sure about that, putting him into the environment. When Ryan is now 10, and luckily the principal at the special ed school had already developed a program called the Satellite Program. She had put into 2 schools, one of the high school that's across the street from the special ed, and one of the middle schools that had satellite programs, that's what she called them. She put her teachers and her aides, and she put the students. And they did inclusion, when inclusion was really just getting started in the 80s. That, again, was a blessing for us. We weren't sure whether this was going to work. I'm now on my lunch hour, running to the school to assure that he's being cared for properly. But we were very fortunate that the principal sat with us early on to say, these are the services that I can provide for you. And I'm saying, you tell me what you can provide and I'll get the rest. He needs adaptive PE, then I will find within the school system someone that will provide adaptive PE for him. We were very fortunate that they also did a buddy system with him, pairing him up with another student without a disability that would assist him through the course of the day. And the school also had an elevator, so Ryan was allowed to use the elevator system, but had to be weaned eventually in case there was ever a fire. He would not be able to do that. Again, that was another task, and Ryan said at one point, the kids are all pushing me. So I went up to the school to observe as they were weaning him toward using the steps, because now this is an open space school. I'm very leery about that. It's not enclosed classrooms, only dividers within the classroom. And I observed that, really, Ryan, they're really not pushing you. They're just like everybody wants to get out at the end of the day. It's freedom at last, it seems like. So once Ryan got accustomed to exiting, guess who was also trying to maneuver those steps and get out at the end of the day? We were fortunate at that school that Ryan was able to do his first science project. He participated. He had resource teachers that assisted him with math and reading. He was also able to stay there the 3 years, and he graduated. He was in a non-curriculum program. But yet, the final year there, as I go up to the school to work on PTA, as usual, my husband and I are very involved with PTA. We'll do whatever it takes. The physical ed teacher gives him a D in physical ed. So I go to him and I says, why do you give him a failing grade, and D when he's in a non-grading curriculum? He tells me, I don't know your child. I said, let me tell you about my child. We've been here for these 9 months, and we have done every advisory. We meet with the team of teachers. We review his IEP to go over the goals, and anything that he's achieved, then we need to take that off and add something. And now you tell me at the end of the school year, you do not know my child. By the time our discussion was over, he knew my child. Because I said, and I'm not aggressive, but I am determined. That's what I tell him. I'm a determined parent. He's my child. I must do what's best for him. He's my future. He's the future of this society. Whatever he can attribute, then that's what's going to happen. The grade was changed to a B, because I said he's not going to have a failing grade on his record. He should not have had a grade at all. If you wanted to give him E for effort and give explanation, that's fine, for all that we've done and tried. Because when Ryan had assignments, we would work with it. He did the assignments, but we did it at his level and submitted it. So there was no excuse for this particular teacher to give him a failing grade or a grade at all. Now we're moving to the high school years. And at the high school, which is, again, as I said previously, is across from the special ed school, there is now another satellite classroom. And with this, there's, again, a team of teachers and aides. They're responsible for the lessons as well as integrating the students into the regular classroom. This was also a valuable experience for Ryan as well as us. Not only did he feel a part of the regular school setting, he also got to know the kids in the neighborhood. He attended school activities and went to the senior prom and graduated in 2003. Some of our barriers that we encountered. In middle school, as I said, the issue with the physical ed teacher. Again, in middle school, obtaining IEP services that were not being provided by the school, getting it on my own as a parent. In high school, we ran into the reading teacher that had this computer program that had this rabbit that was always jumping across the screen. And I says, you know, he really needs to have a one-on-one session because he needs the repetition because of the memory that he has and everything. So she says, well, I can't give him one-on-one. I had too many students. So I went back to the special ed school and I said, we need to revisit his IEP because we need to change what's happening with the reading program. And I sat with the team of teachers, my husband, myself, and Ryan, and we discussed having him come back to the reading teacher at the special ed school. Do you know that I met with resistance for some of the teachers? Oh, we can't do that. You've got a room, you've got 3 aides and a main teacher in the classroom, and you tell me you can't walk across the street to take him over because he needs to have phonics. They're doing sight reading, he's guessing. He needs to have phonics. It was done. The principal said, I understand, Ms. King, we'll do it. And not only as a result.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Judy. I'm very curious about the supported decision-making when that became a factor with Ryan. Did that come after the, high school, or was it during high school?
That was in high school, during
okay.
high school.
Yeah.
And he was integrated into a reading class. And it was a small class, but yet the teacher told me she didn't have enough time to do one-on-one. And I know that they were doing a lot of sight reading and just getting words, and he really was just rote memory and guessing at words. When you're doing the WH, the we and the where, it's guessing because you look at it and you kind of guess at it. And I knew that he needed phonics to get the basic sounding out of words. As Ryan began to transition out of the school system, I must say the special ed school was very good because every year they held a transition session for students and parents, as well as the community organizations and resources that would be able to assist our students as they transitioned from high school really into the adult world. And this started at 14. They've now changed that to 16. They don't do transitioning until 16 now, but back then it was at the age of 14. As Ryan exited the system in the year 2003, he participated, well, before he exited, he did in 2000 participated in the Bridges program, which is a program founded by the Marriott Foundation. And this allows students to prepare for a competitive job within the community. He has been working with Safeway, as was stated earlier, for 16 years, going on 17. For all this time, Ryan has been very student about his job and doing a good job at it. Because he desires to be an entrepreneur, we were referred to the government agency for assistance. And the first government agency that we went to, we referred to, is called Rehabilitative Services. And because he was employed at that time as he exited in 2003, as a result of the Bridges program, helping him, preparing him through, teaching him how to dress for success, how to interview, how to do an application, a job application, he actually got the job on his own. He keeps saying, my job coach. I said, no, he didn't go with you when we went to Safeway's main office. You went and you spoke up about who you were, what you could do. Because as a result of the school system and there was a vocational teacher that did prepare the students. Every year, DC does have what is called a summer youth program, and you can get jobs at 14, and you're guaranteed to get a job. And what the special ed school did was at 14, all the kids stayed with them for the first 2 hours. They could work up to 4 hours. They stayed with them, learning their social security number, learning how to do timesheets back then when they had timesheets, and not clocking in by the computer. So they were teaching them basic things that you need to do in the workforce. And the second 2 hours, they would be teacher aides in the classroom because the special ed school was a year-round program. So that's how he got his first working skills. From there, he moved into, you've worked at the Department of Interior. You got to talk to you.
Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture,
And you worked at Washington.
Hospital Center.
Right. So he came with some job experiences. And again, this is the special ed school with the vocational teacher.
I'm sorry, was there a time, Susie, where you guys, decisions were being essentially made for Ryan, and then you sort of shifted the responsibility and the choices to him?
Right, especially when it came to the IEP, when there were
Yeah.
things that we knew that he needed or he wanted to do.
Right.
And we were getting some resistance from the teaching staff.
Yeah.
And that, because he became a part of it, we realized maybe when he was about 8 that he needs to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And we started saying, and they're saying, well, this is what he wants to do, this is what he needs to do. And some of the people met with resistance, but again, being persistent ourselves and knowing this is
Yeah.
something that he wants to do, and they came around.
Okay.
They came around, yes. Ryan has decided, as I said, he wants to be an entrepreneur as we're exiting the school system. And we finally get, not from the Rehabilitative Services Administration government agency, but they referred us to the Developmental Disabilities Service Agency. And this is where we encounter guardianship. And they're saying in order for him to get the services that he's looking for, you're going to have to get guardianship. That's our practice. And I said, I'm his parent. I'm going to care for him for the rest of his life. I'm going to prepare for him to be as independent as possible. Say, ma'am, if you want the service and you want to be a part of this agency, you have to get guardianship. We had no choice.
Yeah.
So we went to the courts, we filled out all the necessary paperwork, we got the guardianship, knowing that this is not the type of life that we live. We've always allowed Ryan to make his choices. As I said, a person who tries has a chance to succeed, but a person who says, I can't, is already a failure. We never said we can't. You try, do the best you can. It doesn't matter how long it takes you, but how long you what? As long as you what?
Succeed.
As long as you get there and succeed as much as possible. Well, it was a hard road. My husband and I knew that this was not a good choice for us or Ryan, because this is not based on the guidelines of the court. This is not how our lifestyle is. We give him choices. He makes decisions, very opinionated. And he knows what he wants and what he doesn't want, because that's how we've raised him. We know that this is not right. We go back to the courts in 2007 and appeal. We get to the judge, and we're saying that we would like to not only have myself and my husband, but his daughter, our daughter, just in case something happens to us, because the process is lengthy, it's complicated, no one tells you anything if you're doing it on your own, and you have to pay for a lawyer if not. And the judge says us, 3 people it's just too many people to make decisions for someone. We're not really making decisions for him. We're supporting him and the choices he's making. But again, and we decided that we were going to get conservatorship because he's working, he's got a little checking account. We don't want the courts to put a stranger into his life. Therefore, we're going to get conservatorship. The court, as the appeal process is going on, sends Ryan, a lawyer that represents Ryan, that comes to our home for 2 hours, sits in the living room, talks with us, talks with Ryan. He goes back to the court when we have our court date and we appear before the judge. And he fights for us to get out of conservatorship. The judge agrees. He fights for us, for our daughter to become a conservator in case, become a guardian in case something happens to the bus. But then he says, Ryan still needs guardianship. You've only been in the living room and spoken with us for 2 hours. How did you determine that? You didn't go to his work site. At that time, he was volunteering at the Art and Drama Therapy Institute, which is a day program for persons with disabilities. You didn't go no further than our living room. How did you determine that? But the judge agreed, so we're still in the guardianship. We are now faced with still guardianship, and we've discovered some of the encounters with guardianship that we've experienced is different judges have different attitudes. A system of a shoe that fits all. No time is spent in getting to know the individual. The reports seems to be the most important thing to get the guardianship report on time. Because twice we were late with getting the report. Of course, we got a notice from the court and had to appear to explain why. And Ryan is assigned a lawyer again. And this is because of family emergencies that we left town and really just was not focusing, caring for elderly parents at that time. So we are now, for the first time in 2015, get a notice that we've got a intern that's coming to review Ryan, and finally someone has read the report that we've been writing every 6 months.
Can I, I'm going to jump in just for a second. We're starting to get tight on time, and you've brought us up to this point where you are dealing with the guardianship and realizing there are problems with that, right? Do you mind if we turn to Ryan for a little while and see what he has to say?
Okay.
Yeah.
Ryan's going to tell about a day in his life, just to show his independence and how he functions during the course of a day.
Okay. Yeah. I start my day with by getting up and taking care of my personal needs. I dress myself with for the day, make my bed. I take my medicine, which is folic acid. I have my money ready for Metro Access the night before.
And Metro Access is a transportation system that's provided for persons with disabilities, and they give door-to-door service. So they pick them up at the house and take them directly to work. Okay.
All right.
Okay. I return home.
I return home, let myself in with by unlocking the door, turning off the alarm. I have my own code for the alarm system. I prepare my own meals. Sometimes I have leftovers or sandwich and soup. I use the microwave or stove with help or my new wave. I prepare meals 3 days out of the week with my aide. Sometimes I cook. Some things that I cook are meatloaf, mashed potatoes, Brussels sprouts, corn on the cob, spaghetti, tacos, and salads.
Now, Ryan's going to tell you about some of his chores and responsibilities as an independent person. What do you do sometimes?
I do my laundry. I separate my dark from my whites. I put them in the machine. I wash dishes. I help rake leaves. Keep my bathroom clean. Mop the floor. I have my own mop. I vacuum the rugs and dust the floors. Furniture. Okay.
Use things, tell them things.
Things I do by choice. Okay.
What do you want to say?
Okay. Making choices and decisions about them. Things I like to do. Going to movies, going to WWE events.
Yes. Going to
Okay.
concerts.
Going to concerts.
Going to
What?
church.
Oh, going to church. Going to my advocacy meetings.
And
Okay.
and he's
Life-
a board member of,
Lifeline partnership,
which is a spiritual
which is a spiritual and supportive group, and Project Action,
which is an advocate.
which is an advocacy group,
And you're what?
and
I'm
I am co-sergeant of arms.
And what's important?
And what's important
To
to
me.
me?
Making
Making my
decisions.
making. Oh, all right.
You're doing
nervous.
great.
Making my decisions or choices, doing what I want or don't want to do. Having support with when I need it and don't. Okay.
See?
All right. Don't judge me before you get to know me.
That's great. That's the scripted Ryan King. He made some comments about working and his job, unscripted to me when we were talking. Remember what you said about jobs? Tell me, do you remember what you said about that? About you should really value the job you have because there aren't many. Say that. Yeah.
You should value the jobs you have because
What are they?
because people. Huh?
No, go ahead.
What? Because people. I know they like to move around a lot, but value the jobs you have because one day somebody else might take that job and it might not be yours anymore.
Respect your job. Yeah.
The job's not going to come to you. You go to it.
That's what I'm talking about. All right. So it's just been great to hear the story from the inside. Now you, the Kings, you guys worked with Jonathan Martinis. We're going to have Elyn speak next, but I think I'm going to switch to Jonathan for just a moment to briefly tell us about how they moved from guardianship to, I don't even know what the language is, they went from guardianship to the supported decision making.
Sure.
Can you do that quickly for us?
I'm a trial lawyer, Ben. Here's the thing. They didn't move to anything. Ryan and Susie and their family have been doing supported decision making always. One of the first things they ever said to me was, Ryan makes his own decisions. We're not doing things for him. We do things with Ryan. We support Ryan to make his own choices. So when we went to court to ask the court, after 15 years of a guardianship they never wanted or needed, to remove it, we didn't have to say, let's try supported decision making. They've been doing it his whole life. Ryan, when we first met, was I make my own choices. He said, don't judge me till you get to know me, something I quote you all the time on. So we went to the court, and what we did was we dropped a brick on the judge's desk of paperwork. We had Dr. Blank did a 15-page affidavit on all the things supported decision-making is good about. But really what it came down to is these people worked together. They worked together as people, as individuals, and as a family, as a support unit. Ryan has friends, he has professionals in his life, he has family members in his life, and because of that, Ryan has a life.
Now, when you remove the guardianship then, they've already been doing it, and that's how Ryan's making the decisions, and then does that mean he's able to get services
Oh, yeah.
that he would otherwise have to have the guardianship for, right?
There is no service that requires a guardianship. That was a lot of hooey.
Oh, okay.
There is no law that requires that. The fact that they put you through that is immoral, in my opinion. But here's the thing. We went to court, and we were afraid the judge wouldn't want to lift the guardianship without some protection, so we wrote up a power of attorney form that we worked on for months and months that would specify, exactly what they already do. And we said, Judge, if you're worried, he will sign this power of attorney as soon as you lift the guardianship. And the judge looked Ryan right in the eyes, and he said, you know what, Ryan? I've seen this power of attorney. If you want to sign it, you can. It's your choice. I'm lifting the guardianship. And I still tear up when I think about that, because this family fought for so long for that.
And Ryan now gets to do what Ryan wants to do the way they've always been doing it.
And not reporting to anyone to say, this is what he does this month, this is when he did his dental appointment, this is when he was hospitalized. And it took him all of 10 minutes. The judge said, I read the entire packet. It took him all of 10 minutes.
Which is a shame. I had a whole speech set up.
So with the guardianship, those are things you had to do.
Right.
You had to tell someone else this is what he's doing, and
Yeah.
you know,
Every
that.
6 months, we had to do the guardianship report. We
I
had to
see.
keep track of all doctor's appointments, all hospitalizations, all activities that he's involved in.
Okay.
And everything Ryan did, he had to get someone else's okay for, because he couldn't sign his own plans.
Right.
He couldn't be involved in his own systems without someone else's okay. Even though, as a family, they'd been empowering him all the time. He did not exist in a legal sense. He had no rights. Ryan sits before you now as an individual, a citizen, a person with every right everyone should already have.
Who was that person in your case, the guardian that you had to report to?
The court.
No, we report to the
court.
court, directly to the courts.
Okay.
Every 6 months.
Yeah, the court is the guardian.
court is
Don't
the
ever
guardian.
think that if you become a guardian, the actual guardian is the court. The court is the one that makes the decision at the end of the day. If the court does not like something that you as a guardian are doing, the court can simply change it.
Well, when you say the court, do you mean a judge?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, or whatever judge happens to hear it that day.
Yeah.
Susie didn't, Susie told the story nicely. I get angry when I hear the story because they went to court after 7 years and said, he doesn't need this.
Right.
He makes his own decisions. And the judge essentially said, if you don't want to be his guardian, I'll find someone else.
Right.
Imagine that.
And we don't want strangers. We didn't want strangers in his life. We know him better than anybody else. Why
Right.
would we allow them to put a stranger?
Yeah.
So they did allow my daughter to become a third guardian because a judge previously said that's just too many people to
Right.
be making decisions for the person. And we're thinking we're not making decisions for
Well,
him.
this is so just displaying my own ignorance of the law. But why wouldn't you be the guardian? Why wouldn't you and your husband be the guardians?
We were the guardians. We were the guardians.
But you
We
had to
reported.
report to the court.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the
Oh,
system.
that's the part of the. Okay, that's the
how
part of what you
system
have to do.
works.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Once you become a guardian, you have to report every 6 months from the date
I
that
see.
you become
I
a
see.
guardian. That's your 6 month date.
So they're overseeing you as a guardian.
Yeah.
Okay.
The guardian has a guardian.
The guardian has a guardian.
Okay, I'm going to take a breath here. We have a lot of that story now from the inside, and with Jonathan's help as well, who won the case for them. Elyn, we probably have another 10 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions.
I
do
can
you
go
wa-
for 10 minutes.
What is that?
I can do 10 minutes.
I know you can do 10 minutes. I'm going to ask you to do 10 minutes. I should also say, I've been given by Chris Scheiders these things here, which I guess you hit the person over the head with. Anyway, if you could keep it to 10 minutes, I'd love to hear what you have to say, and then we will we'll open up for questions, for anyone after that. All right?
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Ben. So supported decision-making is such an important tool to empower people to be basically the architects of their own lives. The story of Susie and Ryan is an amazing story of supported decision-making. And Ryan, actually, you're a much more versatile cook than I am. I only know one meal. Okay. So I'd like to today discuss my experience of forced treatment and then of voluntary treatment and supported treatment. For those of you who don't know, in addition to being a law professor, I'm a consumer with schizophrenia. So I, at times, have delusions and hallucinations and disorganized speech. I write about this in my memoir, The Center Cannot Hold, My Journey Through Madness, and I have indeed experienced both forced treatment and voluntary treatment. Treatments that were forced on me were involuntary hospitalization, involuntary commitment to a psychiatric hospital. As an aside, there's a funny story with that. The doctors wrote on the emergency certificate that I was dangerous to myself and others, and they also wrote that I was gravely disabled. And the reason they gave for my grave disability was I couldn't do my Yale Law School homework, which made me wonder about much of the rest of New Haven. I was forcibly medicated at times. I was restrained. For the first 3 weeks in the hospital, I was restrained anywhere from 5 to 20 hours a day. I then moved wards. I stopped being restrained. It's kind of a robust finding in the literature that whether you're restrained has more to do with the ethos of the ward than with patient characteristics or behavior. And I was also given very little privacy, which in a way is kind of forced observation. So the hospital staff watched me when I went to the bathroom and when I took a shower, and I was not allowed to have a conversation outside the presence of staff with anyone, including my parents. I was not, on the other hand, subjected to guardianship, though many decisions were taken away from me and made by others. I might also make a distinction between force and coercion. With force, they hold you down and invade your bodily integrity, as well as your decisional authority. With coercion, you make your own decision, but under threat that if you don't, you will be forced. For example, if I had signed a voluntary under threat of civil commitment, that would be coercion. If I took meds knowing they would inject me if I didn't, that would be coercion. Mental health professionals talk about people, quote, willingly going into restraints, though there's really nothing willing about it, right? That's a funny one. It was going to happen one way or another, and I knew that. I wish the hospital staff had allowed me to consult my family about these issues. They may have been able to convince me to truly be a voluntary as the outcome which would likely serve my best interests, or at least sign a voluntary, which even though it would have been somewhat of a coercive choice, it would still have been my choice and something I would have valued having. As an example, voluntary patients have extra rights in psych hospitals that involuntary patients don't. An example of a situation of support for my family was in my decision not to pursue a literal civil commitment hearing. I had that right and was all set to go, and my dad had a conversation with me, convincing me that having a civil commitment on my record would have followed me around. He was right. On my Connecticut bar application, if I had been committed, I would have had to disclose. I'm so glad my dad gave me, and I followed his advice, that he gave me the support to make the right decision. I am also someone who consults friends and other loved ones about most important decisions, whether I should stay at Oxford after I broke down there or whether I should go home, as the docs were recommending, whether I should re-enroll at Yale Law School after I broke down during my first term. I'm going to do another aside. There's a funny story with that. So Yale had a policy. If you were withdrawn from school for psychiatric reasons, you had to be evaluated by the head of student health in the psychiatry department. So like any good student, I looked this guy up, and this is before the days of the internet, so I'm pulling books and looking at periodical indices, and I find an article by him. Students withdrawn from school for psychiatric reasons, evaluating them for readmission. Questions you want to ask and answers you want to hear. So when I went into the interview, I was really well prepared. Another issue I consulted friends about was whether I should risk the stress of this typical path of Yale law students, namely working at a big law firm and clerking for an appellate judge after my first year. Both, I think, would actually have been too stressful for me. Whether I should quit my legal services job because I found it boring and stressful at the same time, a terrible combination. Whether I should do some other practice job or go into teaching, I decided to teach, and this was clearly the right decision. My friends and family didn't always believe that these were the right decisions, but they helped me think them through and supported me in what I decided. Other areas where I have had support even when people disagreed with me were not admitting myself to a psych hospital on my doctor's recommendation. Actually, I say that my proudest accomplishment is that I haven't been hospitalized since 82, 83, which is sort of a weird thing to say. I wouldn't say I was proud of my cancer not relapsing. I would say I was just very lucky, but that's the way I feel about it. There were times, though, when it probably would have been in my best interest to admit myself, and my doctor showed me the greatest respect by honoring my choice not to be hospitalized. At times, they had to sit with considerable anxiety about my well-being and potential dangerousness to self or even others, and I'm really grateful to them that they were willing to make that decision. Perhaps the most controversial supported decision I have made and kept making frequently over 10 years was to try to get off my antipsychotic medication. My motto was, the less medicine, the less effective. One way I could prove that my schizophrenia diagnosis was all a terrible mistake, which I desperately wanted to believe, was by getting off meds and doing well, so I kept trying and trying and trying. I undertook each effort with great gusto and failed miserably each time. Steve and other friends were virtual saints as they watched me do this over and over, tried to convince me to stay on my meds or get back on my meds, but supported me when I decided otherwise. This is actually a feature of SDM. The patient gets to decide, even if others disagree with her or his decision. What are the reasons this was a good thing? The doctors were treating me with dignity and respect. This basically feels good. They were supporting my autonomous choices. They were sometimes showing me respect by being agnostic about whose choice was better. Maybe in this case, the patient did know best. They recognized that voluntary choice is a more stable solution. If you force someone, they're likely to go back to the way they were once you stop administering the force. Sometimes the choice is so bad that it's okay to try to coerce. For example, if you don't take your medication, I may have to hospitalize you. Again, this is a coercive choice, but a choice nonetheless. I myself have benefited enormously from a combination of medication and intensive therapy, basically 5 days a week for almost 40 years. Clinicians distinguish between psychoanalytic or psychodynamic therapy and supportive therapy, but one of my analysts has said, and I think rightly, that analysis is the most supportive therapy there is. It helps you understand yourself better, including your needs and wants and conflicts that get in the way of fulfilling these. One sorts through decisions with the help of your analysts. Analysts generally don't give advice, but they help you sort through your own wants and needs. A prime example of SDM. My analyst did somewhat coerce me around meds, and at one point he said he couldn't work with me if I kept trying to get off them. I asked him to make one more concerted effort to get off, which again, I failed miserably at, and I acceded to his recommendation. I was ready to try this. I have to say that my staying on my meds made my life actually much better. So at this point, my medication is wholly consensual. I wouldn't dream of trying to get off the medication. That said, while I wish I had been smarter sooner, I'm glad that I wasn't literally forced and was able to make my own decision in my own time and my own way. In the end, patients, like all of us, are relational creatures, and most people informally recruit family and friends to help them make most important decisions. Indeed, my husband, Will, is my greatest support at this point. SDM simply formalizes this, allowing it to happen with people who don't have natural supports, and giving all supports education about decision-making, and often a template to help them help their people make decisions. As someone who has experienced involuntary treatment, I think to the extent we can safely help people make their own decisions, we are doing people a great honor and a great service. Many thanks. I did it in 10
All right, that
minutes,
was
huh?
9 minutes. That's
9
really
minutes,
good.
all right.
I feel like one of those old-time producers. Give me your life story with all the emotions in 30 seconds. Okay? There are a lot of questions I personally have, especially about, well, you're choosing, what about people who don't have supportive people around them? Or you know, like the Careys, everyone you know makes worse decisions than you do. Anyway, but I'll throw it open to questions from the audience. We have about 10, just over 10 minutes or so, so keep it tight if you can, and be loud. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rudy Caceres, and I'm very much all forms of forced treatment and medical paternalism, and I am a big supporter of your support decision making and your work, but I come across a lot of people who don't get it and try to frame it as if you are the enemy. So I'm a survivor of forced hospitalization, restraints, and catheterization, and oftentimes people tell me is that I'm sorry about your bad luck, but you're the exception to the rule, and that my adult child needed to be forcibly hospitalized, not only for his own good, but for everyone else's own good, because if you let him go willy-nilly, he's just going to end up just killing everyone. So therefore, forced treatment must exist for the greater good. And so I always try to find ways to better articulate myself, is that being against forced treatment doesn't mean I'm against treatment in general. So that's why I like coming to these presentations, of trying to find different ways to articulate my stance. And I'd love to hear more about your feelings on that, because you might come across that people who are completely against what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, are there circumstances where forced treatment is indeed justified, for example?
So I actually say sometimes I'm very pro-psychiatry, but very anti-force. So force is a really difficult thing to live with. I mean, most people don't like other people in their lives forcing them to do things, and psychiatric patients are no different than that. Unlike you, I believe there are some rare cases where force is appropriate and justified. As an example, if someone lacks complete capacity to make decisions, and can't, with the help of supports, be made capable of making decisions, maybe we should use force. So if someone says, I would love to be on this medication, I've been on it in the past, it's helped me enormously, but I can't take it because I've heard a message from God that it's going to cause the world to end. I think that might be a situation where we would say, a benign other person should maybe make this decision for you at this time. I would like to try to empower people mostly to make their own decisions, and there are techniques that you can use to help with that, like advance directives. So where you say in advance, if this happens, this is what I want. So that's, and there are psychiatric advance directives that people can do as well. So I think in a way that is a form of supported decision making too that we should make more use of.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm out of my depth talking about forced treatment, so this is not about that. But I like what you said, that's a form of supported decision making. I get a lot of questions when I speak that are formed like yours is. This is wonderful for Ryan, but Ryan's not my child. You don't know my child is different. And I say this, you're right, I don't know your child. The decision of whether or not to seek conservatorship is an intensely personal one that can only be made based upon a person's knowledge and the facts and their information. What I try to do is give information, and here is one, I think, critical piece of information in this conversation, is that when we're talking about whether or not a conservator or a guardianship is needed, the critical question is whether or not the person has capacity, whether or not the person can make decisions for him or herself. And I think there's a critical question that we need to ask there. What have you tried? What have you tried? Let us not assume that a person lacks capacity based on a diagnosis. So I've always said that's my trial lawyer geeky dream, is there's going to be a case where everyone is all for guardianship. The petitioner, the person is okay, whatever, and the guardian item is fine. And the judge says, you know, before I sign this order, give me a list of things that you've tried and didn't work. Because without that, we can't know. So while I may not know that person's child, I can ask that question. I can help you consider what else might be options for you that you might try. In the end of the day, guardianship or conservatorship may be appropriate. But as a parent myself, I would want to exhaust every possible opportunity to empower my child before I disempowered my child.
That's great. Okay. Yes. Loud.
Why don't you stand up, please?
There are mics out there.
Yeah.
To know if what has occurred in Washington, D.C. is comparable to what happens in California, or states have individual legalities concerning guardianship and conservatorship and so forth.
I think that she's asking if there are differences in the regulations and the laws state to state. That's a law question.
Short version, yes.
Yeah.
But they all essentially come down to the same thing. Some laws are better written than others. Some of them actually come out and say that a person should not go under guardianship if there are less restrictive alternatives available. But ultimately, the line I give around the country is we really don't need to change laws. We need to change culture. We need to change a culture that says, because you are a person with a disability, you can't. Sir, you're wearing a great shirt. Your shirt says, anxious is how I feel, it's not who I am. That's the culture we need to change. We can't define people by their limitations. We can't define people by what they can't do. Who here took their jobs because they stink at it? Of course you didn't. You do what for a living, that which you do well, that which you want to do. You are judged on your abilities and your preferences. Only people with disabilities are judged on their limitations. So we need to change that culturally and decide that we're going to give people opportunities to exercise the same rights everyone else already does and frankly takes for granted. Remember when I asked, what's your favorite right? It took a while for anybody to talk about it. Because people without disabilities don't think about their favorite rights because they already know they have all of them. So when we can move culture in that direction, we won't need to change laws.
Well, since it was the title of the conference, I had a feeling that would be the right answer. Right. Decision making, yeah. Okay, yes, sir. One more question here, I think.
My name is Dan, and my question has to do with the intersection or possible intersection between SDM and the criminalization of the mentally ill. In California, the largest institutions for the treatment of mentally ill are in the jails and the prisons. And my question to the panel is, what impact, if any, will SDM have, or how would it be implemented to have an impact on that problem?
Do you mean
criminalization of the mentally ill?
Yeah. Do you mean how it would be applied in the prisons where the mentally ill, or how it would impact the population that ends up in prison?
Exactly.
Whether it would impact the probability of the mentally ill ending up in jails and prisons.
Right.
And secondarily, the fact of the matter is that the law, at least in California,
Yeah.
provides just the opposite for the mentally ill who've been criminalized, and the cases strip them of their autonomy.
Okay, yeah, I think Elyn let's
Yeah,
Elyn wants to answer this quickly. Well, you're doing a study. Go ahead and say what you think the impact would be.
So basically, one issue is we can't really see until we actually study it. But I think there is a synergy there. I have a friend who is a county psychiatrist, worked at one of the clinics here, who has gone off, and she has part-time private practice, and the other part she goes down to Santa Monica Beach, and she talks to homeless people who have mental illness, and they engage in supported decision-making, where she tries to get them to come to treatment, makes appointments, get medication, and I think that probably, my guess, again, it has to be studied, will impact the kind of people ending up in jails and prisons. I mean, I agree with you that that's a terrible tragedy in our country. You know, that LA County Jail and Rikers Island are the biggest psych hospitals in the country. That's horrible, and we need to change that. And I think SDM can be part of that puzzle, part of that solution.
And you know what? We actually do have some evidence on this. We're very lucky we have a judge in the audience who heads up a mental health court. And I wonder if you might want to talk about that a little bit.
Well, actually, I would just like to say, that's a great question. Can you hold on to it till 1:45?
Yeah, that's yeah.
That's what you're trying
Pioneer of the first mental health court in the United States 20 years ago. It's the perfect question, and
That's
we're
great.
gonna talk about exactly how that happened.
Yeah, we'll take care of that.
And paradigm shifts and new culture, as Jonathan mentioned.
Yeah, we'll take care of that in the later session. Do you want to add one more thing?
I do, because you have to look at SDM not as something like a light switch. We don't do SDM. We don't just make SDM happen. SDM is a paradigm. It starts at a young age. It starts with respect for decision-making and self-determination in schools. It carries through in supports and services like person-centered planning and vocational rehabilitation, both of which are forms of supported decision-making. If you think about it, anyone here who's ever done anything with person-centered planning, that is supposed to be where a counselor works with a person to help the person understand the services and supports that are available, and the person chooses them. Doesn't that sound like supported decision-making? The student-led IEP in schools, where the student sits at the head of the table, and the whole idea is the student is to receive information from teachers and peer professionals to help choose his or her educational course. Doesn't that sound like supported decision-making? So supported decision-making is not a thing. It's not a process. It is a paradigm through which we can empower decision-making and empower self-determination, which we do know from studies leads to a better, more independent, more community-included life.
All right, hold on. I think we're gonna call it. We're running up way past time now. I think we'll take a break. We have 2 or 3 more sessions where you can ask questions. Okay, but we are running into the second session. So why don't we take a quick break? And those of you who have questions, we'll make time for them in the next session. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.